Welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast, featuring conversations with practitioners inventing the future of analytics engineering. Today, I'm speaking with Mikkel Dengsøe, co-founder at SYNQ. Mikkel recently wrote a series of posts on his experiences as an analytics engineer with Agentic coding tools. He used Cursor paired with a dbt Fusion engine and Omni to stage, model, and analyze some real estate data. In this conversation, I dig into Mikkel's experiences in almost painful detail. Agentic coding is significantly changing the workflow of everyone who writes code. And I wanted his thoughts on how ready agents are in the world of analytics engineering. And even more importantly, what tips he's learned for how to maximize their potential. Without further ado, let's get into it. Mikkel, welcome to the Analytics Engineering Podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
I went down a rabbit hole on LinkedIn recently. I read a bunch of posts that you had written about your experiences trying out new AI-enabled data tools, so we have a lot to get into. But before we dive into the meat of it, I just want to take an opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about your background? How does your career in data come together, and what are you up to these days?
Yes, I can start from the beginning. I've been in data for, I think it's coming up to 15 years now, and started my career in data at a Danish shipping company, which was very much kind of 0 to 1. So when I came in, there was no data warehouse, and the only way we could know how many containers we shipped was by an IT guy pulling that out of the system every 6 months, and then got to spend 2 years there building up their data warehouse, or a SQL Server, which it was back then, which was super fun. And then after that, spent 5 years at Google, which was kind of very different gear, more going like
That's a natural transition, just global shipping company straight to Google.
exactly. And that was very kind of 100 to N, where you just get and in my case, I worked with the ads data, and you get like a perfectly curated data table that you can work with, and everything kind of works. And then after that, I joined a company called Monzo. I think you're familiar with Monzo. For those of you who are not, it's a scaling fintech out of the UK, and that was very much kind of the 1 to 100. So I think when I joined, we were 30 data people, but scaled to 100 data people over 2 years. We had 10,000 dbt models, and we built, I think, every internal tool under the sun for dbt in there. So super interesting. And then 3.5 years ago, went on to found SYNQ alongside Peter and Steve, which is a data observability platform.
Okay, so you've been in many different parts of the journey, small teams, large teams, building data warehouses on top of SQL Server, building data warehouses on top of internal Google infrastructure that none of us outside the company know about, all of these different contexts. Before we move on from the background, tell us a little bit more about SYNQ.
Yeah, so we are a data observability platform that primarily work with companies using tools like dbt already, but have issues kind of going from, often they have data that's important, but they start having data that's business critical. That might be that they have customer facing dashboards, machine learning models, or something else. And then they want better monitoring. They want, we often deploy anomaly monitors, and they also want workflows such as incident management for when things go wrong. And we were founded in 2022. So now gone through the kind of early stages of, I would say, working with scale ups and startups, and now also started onboarding enterprises and larger companies. So it's been a fun journey.
What caused you to want to dive down the rabbit hole of testing you basically did your series of blog posts, went through the modern data stack and said, okay, what's the most current version of this tool, and how effectively can I AIify that? Whether that's like using Cursor to build dbt models, or using the agent experience inside of Omni. Like what made you decide to get into this and write about it?
But the first part of it is just, it's super fun to tinker with these tools and try them out. Like it's just magic. And we were also building an MCP server at SYNQ. So I had a lot of interest in like seeing How does it work with others? What can we learn from it? But it was also a lot driven by being able to have these conversations with our customers. So when they come and ask for it, when they are thinking about this stuff, and being able to speak to them from the point of view of having actually tried this and seen what works and seen what doesn't work.
I remember the early days of using Redshift, I don't know, 2014, 2015 for me. And it was such a visceral experience writing queries against that engine relative to anything that I had done before. And it was the kind of thing that, like, if I had not actually interacted with that product myself directly, I would not have had the kind of like visceral understanding of like what a big state change cloud data was going to be for all of us. And this feels like another one of those moments. Like if you don't have direct hands-on keyboard experience of doing this stuff, you're not going to really get it. Is that fair?
Yeah, spot on. And I think pretty much every data team out there should be doing this kind of stuff unless they have a very good reason not to, because I'd say the risk and the stakes can be pretty low if you like use it for internal workflows like data modeling and writing tests. You're still in control. So I'd say it's something I recommend everybody to do.
Why don't you spec out exactly what you did? Like, did you do any ingestion work? You did some modeling work. What tasks did you actually try to accomplish?
Yeah, so I basically wanted to do it's three different blog posts. The first one is the data modeling part of it. The second one is the testing part of it, and the third one is then exposing it in Omni's AI agent, where people can write questions about the data and they would get it back. And then there's actually a fourth blog post, which is once the data is live, how can you use, in that case, the SYNQ MCP to do things like root cause analysis and planning changes. But I basically started with the data modeling part of it. So I had some raw data coming from different JSON sources, some XML, some raw files that I just extracted and put into Snowflake. And then the kind of data
So,
modeling.
the data before you kind of started your experiment, you already had data loaded into Snowflake.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
And then for the data modeling, I basically went about it starting from the sources and then working my way through staging, marts, and finally metrics using the semantic layer. And I think each step looks a little bit different when you use AI tools because it behaves a little bit different throughout. And and I'd say some things that were very helpful in this AI modeling. And in terms of tooling, I used Cursor with the DBT MCP plugged in. And if you're not familiar with the DBT MCP, it basically lets you, uh, using a prompt, interact with different DBT tools, which can be things like executing a DBT build, but it can also be get models or get everything upstream of a given model. So you can do all this kind of cool chaining without you actually being aware of that happening in the background.
So, Cursor, DBT, MCP. What actual large language model did you use?
I just used the default one in there, which I believe is I believe it's Sonnet, the cloud one.
Got it.
And there's an important distinguishing factor where, as you use these different MCPs, so Cursor is really good at, of course, writing code, which is what it does, but it cannot execute queries on your behalf. So if you want to extract raw data and actually query the Snowflake database to get rows out, you had to do that in Claude using Claude Desktop. And that was basically a very kind of key workflow I realized early on, that as I started developing this data and building these data models, and the first thing I did was actually get a snapshot of sample data from Snowflake. So I extracted 10,000 rows of what a source looked like. I then fed that into Cursor and I told Cursor, this is examples of what this data actually looks like. And then using that data, Cursor was actually able to model this data in a very clever way. So there was a column called quarter, which would be 2025 Q1. And Cursor could then understand that this needed to be translated into a date time and do all these transformations.
To get my own priors out on the table, I've used our MCP server a decent amount, less within Cursor, more within Claude Desktop. I've used Claude Code a bunch. I don't think you used Claude Code. Is that right?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Your stack was Cursor, Claude Models, Claude Desktop, and you made a statement. Cursor cannot directly execute queries inside of Snowflake, but Claude Desktop can. Is that because there's some tool use that Claude Desktop has that the Cursor doesn't have? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I believe so. So when you have Cloud Desktop, and if you write queries against the dbt MCP, that Cloud Desktop can actually visualize a graph. It can show you outputs of what a SQL statement returns, and Cursor, at least as far as I know, was not able to do that. So I found a bit of a kind of middle ground where I took sample data out of Snowflake, put that into a CSV, and then fed that back into Cursor so that could actually look at the raw data.
Like as a part of its own context window?
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh. You just like, oh, you actually like took the CSV and you like saved it in your project your like DBT project directory or something.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. And that feels like an MCP server that needs to exist. Now I'm like, okay.
And it's pretty key that you do this, at least for my workflow, because what I could also do then we can move on to that later, but when I wanted to write unit tests of my data, I could actually use real data examples from this the sample data to write that. Or when I wanted to automatically document the data, I asked Cursor to specify examples in the documentation based on the most common occurrences within that column. So this was kind of a very core pillar of my data modeling, was basically for Cursor to have a sneak peek into what does the raw data look like.
But you agree that's like a little hacky, right? Like the Cursor should really be able to interact directly with Snowflake or Databricks or whatever
Yeah.
in order to be able to, when you're modeling, a lot of the work of modeling is actually investigating the overall shape of the underlying data so that you can make good decisions about what code you need to write. It seems like the agent should be empowered to do that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say so. There might be a way around it. Maybe it's possible in a way I didn't know about, but I was kind of patching the gaps with uploading into the context window. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Okay, so that is what you found to be the state of the art today.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to submit some feature requests to the DBT MCP server to support.
I think this is not the DBT MCP server as far as I know. I think this is Cursor versus Cloud Desktop. So that, to my understanding, that's where the limitation lies.
Got it. You get your sample data. You're allowing Cursor to kind of access that as a part of its context, and then you found that it was able to make good decisions about conversions of date times and other things like this. And did you have to specifically suggest that it did conversions, or it just kind of naturally did that type of introspection?
It got the defaults pretty right, but then I gave it input in terms of what I would like to see from that source data. And I made the decision early on that I wanted control over everything that happened. So I asked it to do one model at a time instead of creating this whole series of staging and mods and everything in one go. I said, do one at a time and let me review for each one so I can kind of follow along and still be in control.
One model at a time, or like one layer at a time?
I did one model at a time.
Got it. Okay. So your kind of prompt workflow was, hey, build me a model with this name that stages the data from this table. Is that basically right?
Yeah.
I have not personally tried to go greenfield on a DBT project with AI. I spent a lot of time kind of making tweaks and changes to our existing internal analytics project. But let's say that you ask Cursor to build you a model, and there's some aspects of it that you don't like. Do you modify your original prompt and trash the output code and run the whole thing again? Or do you actually say, that's not quite it? Can you please make the following changes?
It depends a little bit where in the set of layers it is, I would say. So what kind of happened when I went from staging, it was very much taking a column, running a regular expression to get into a date time and so on, like very kind of predictable work that was less about business logic. But then as I moved my way down to the mods and the metrics, I kind of started to describing my ideal data product or business outcome. Like, what do I want to do as a user? What's the kind of job to be done for this data model as a final output? And that's when Cursor started to get creative, and it made up all kind of metrics that I hadn't really anticipated. So one was something like a apartment price relative to the time on market. And it was actually a bit interesting because what I did there was I actually just went into the code and I removed metrics that I thought was not relevant. But a few of them were good surprises, and I kept them around.
Huh. Yeah, that is fascinating. And new ideas coming through the process. You actually have a brainstorming partner there.
Yeah.
Which layer did you feel like it added the most value at?
Yeah, I think actually, maybe broader speaking, I think that the testing and the
So the modeling, you're saying it actually added less value in the modeling, but the testing it actually accelerated significantly.
I think testing and the AI
Huh.
agent asking questions, that's where I actually found it most interesting. And I think part of that is that for me, a lot of kind of modeling is almost like, you write SQL, but SQL is a little bit like English. So you can kind of easily express what you want to do for a simple data set. Testing is very different. That's can actually in some cases be a harder task.
It's a little more verbose. Like there's more to write, and you're constantly figuring, you're like reminding yourself the structure of the YAML or something like that.
Yeah.
For these different phases, I'm curious to ask you for each of them what you felt like the relative speed up was or something like that. But let's just start on modeling. Do you feel that you're somebody who's worked in the space for a long time? With this workflow, did you feel more effective, efficient when you were doing modeling with Cursor and dbt-MCP?
Yeah, significantly. Like a factor of multiples.
Got it. So you were able to get done multiple times more in the same period of time than you would have been able to otherwise.
Yeah. And it just worked, like the regular expressions to extract the date from the string, all of that it just got it right. So I think in terms of the kind of staging and intermediate layer, super fast, and it just completely nailed it. In terms of the mod and the semantic or the metrics, the benefit was almost more that it was a bit like a sparring partner to me, helping me think of metrics I wouldn't otherwise have thought of. So it kind of changed a bit from taking away the like tedious work upstream to more downstream thinking in terms of what are ideas that I can riff on with this agent that I hadn't thought about myself.
This is a weird one. I don't know if you feel the same way that I do, but I've always found data modeling to be actually like a fun activity. There's a certain level of satisfaction that comes with like doing this thing the right way. Did this make it more fun, less fun, unchanged fun?
I think it makes it more fun. And one thing I consistently did is every time I asked it a question, I asked, explain your reasoning.
Mm.
So when it would suggest a data model or a join or a metric, it would also say why it did it. So it kind of kept me in the loop more so than just automatically spitting out tens of models and mods that I didn't understand. I think if that was the case, then I would feel very differently about it. But I actually felt like I was like learning as I went, and I just skipped a lot of like looking up after the regular expression and all that stuff.
I think you mentioned in one of your posts that you, as a part of this, you also tried out the new DBT Fusion engine.
Yeah.
Did that impact your overall experience? Like, so for example, Fusion is good at spotting syntax errors in your code and giving you like little red squigglies in VS Code or in Cursor. Is Cursor able to iteratively identify its own errors in code that it may have written using these red squigglies and then like self-correct?
It mostly does that, yeah. That was one place where I found it super useful. So in Fusion, when you have your lineage, it shows you if a given column is a pass-through. So if it basically is a column without any transformations done to it. And if we shift gears to the testing part of it, one of my philosophies when I was writing the tests is that if there's a column that's just passed through, so there's no joins, there's no transformations to that column, don't add another not null or unique test if there's already one upstream. And I could actually kind of bounce back and forward between using the IDE to check this and see if the model got it right and then specify that as a testing strategy. And that was like, I think already there you're getting into territory that's like, you're maybe in the top 10% of data teams when it comes to testing once you start thinking like that.
I love that. And how about the DBT NCP server? I've been very, very happy with the way that has been adopted. We've seen a ton of adoption for a thing that is, I think we launched it in April. Did any feature requests come out of your testing? Like Where do you think we need to grow and improve there?
It depends a little bit on the task that you do. I'd say that the more context and the more tools that this has available, the more stuff you can do. So I can give you an example. When we had the kind of fourth part of the blog post was going in and looking at actual testing errors and then doing root cause analysis. And for that, I actually used the SYNQ MCP. And one of the APIs or functions that we have is we collect all your Git commits and have a history of that. So it could actually go in and it could list, when I asked it to analyze root causes, it could go through all the code changes and say, was there like a recent commit by someone that was correlated with this change? So I think the type of request would depend very much on the kind of job I'm doing at that moment.
Got it. Okay, great. Let's move on towards testing. You said that this is maybe the area in which this workflow, this set of tools was the most additive. Why? What did you do here and what went well?
Yeah, I think my philosophy from speaking to many data teams now is that testing is really hard. I don't think many data teams know how to test, and I don't think you can blame them for it either. Um, what I will say is, I think 50% of our customers, when they come to us, alert fatigue is like their top problem. And I think somewhere in the order of like 80 to 90% of tests that we see people use is like not unique. And I don't think that represents the actual challenges of the data itself. So the first thing I did in Cursor when it came to testing, I actually took a testing philosophy we've used internally, and I specified that as a set of guidelines. So that is, for instance,
You
I
actually
want
fed the philosophy. You had a written document and you fed that into Cursor.
yeah. So that was, for instance, like test heavily at the source, don't retest columns that are passed through, and focus on business and metric anomalies when you go down to the MART layer. And that actually worked really well. And then I asked it, for my sources and for my intermediary staging at tests using that philosophy, which it got surprisingly right. And I think it added the right relevant test to that um, and really nailed that experience. And then as I moved down to the MART level, I started asking things like write relevant unit tests. And then I used the little trick from before again around giving it 1,000 sample rows from the actual Snowflake database. So it could go up and it could actually see this is how data looks like. So it actually wrote these very relevant unit tests that I would otherwise have to spend a lot of time writing myself.
Hmm. Can you give any examples there?
Yeah, it's very simple. The first one was just as you pass in a string value in that uh, date column, is it then transformed correctly to date time, and does it look like this and this? And they just work out of the box. So it perfectly nailed that. And the final part of it, which is when it got really interesting, is then when we came to the final layers of the metrics. I asked it to uh, look at the actual raw data and um, make assumptions about what you think these metrics should be. And that's when it started doing things like this specific square meter price should be between value X and Y. And it really kind of went in and reasoned a lot for why it thought that different tests should be there. It even broke it down by segments. So specific postcodes had higher or lower thresholds and all these kind of details that would be fairly hard to do.
I have to imagine that at least a big part of the value of the testing workflow here is that nobody wants to write tests in the first place.
Yeah.
Like it's not where people, data professionals get up and want to spend their time. And
Yeah.
so making it easy, making it a fun challenge, I think is a big win in of itself. But what do you think about, you said you were multiples more effective on the modeling side. Do you think that this was, 5x or more time efficient on the testing side?
Yeah, I think at least I say the only place I had to go in and tinker with the threshold was on the business metrics layer. So let's say it created an interval for what a square meter price should be. I don't think that's a particularly good test because prices are going to move up, and in 2 years that test is going to fail. So I replaced that with a self-loading anomaly monitor. But apart from that, it just kind of nailed the testing, and it did it in a way that was much more sophisticated than if you just randomly placed not null and unique test on key fields. It actually thought about the lineage, and it thought about the different stages and layers. So I think that's like at least a 5x.
Okay, tell me about the BI layer.
Yeah, this one is interesting because I think that I maybe got a little bit of a philosophical question for the data community, because I think many people, they start at the BI layer. So they start by making this chatbot thing that people can ask questions to and give some data back. And I think it's actually it's a pretty risky place to start. And the reason for that is that that's going to be used by your business users. And I think you only have so many shots at goal to get it wrong before they lose trust in you, and they're not going to come back to this tool. And but I can talk a bit about how I did it, and also some of the learnings that I got throughout.
When you're doing this work in modeling and testing, this is all kind of in DVT spec. So you can fully describe all this in code. Move over to Omni, and I think you're now out of cursor. You're now like in the Omni interface. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So was that a problem? The cursor's quite good. Did doing this work inside of Omni still give you what you needed from an agent perspective?
Yeah. I think there's basically, I can see two ways of making this BI self-serve layer. One is I could have used Claude and then the DBT MCP on the semantic layer, or you can use something like Omni that had it built in. And the way it works in Omni is you create a topic. A topic is just a data model that you can join to other data models. But then very importantly, you specify an AI context. And I think this is where there's a whole set of skills we have to learn as an industry when it comes to AI context. So I just used some examples from their documentation and tailored that to my use case. So I said, if a user asks about price, always give the square meter price. If they ask about data, never make anything up that is not directly in the data mart you're looking at. And if anybody asks about where this data is coming from, mention the source. So you basically specify in what's called the AI context in Omni, you specify these kind of instructions for the LLM on how it should behave for different user questions. And that for me is like a very new thing to learn. Like, what do I even put in there?
You could also imagine these ways, as you're talking about this, I'm like imagining all the ways that this could go off the rails. You could imagine two different teams that both maintain some kind of model that maybe is a little bit overlapping, and they both are trying to get the model to do a thing that they want it to do, and they're like giving it successively more intense instructions. Use my thing. There's all these dynamics that, yeah, we're just kind of like at the very baby steps of. So you provided a bunch of AI context. Were you using Omni's agent? What is it called?
They call it AI assistant, and it's essentially
AI assistant.
When you come into the BI tool, it's there as a first-class citizen you can use as you would look at a dashboard.
Got it. So were you using the AI assistant so that you could create assets in Omni faster, more efficiently, or were you creating AI instructions so that your users could use the AI assistant?
And the last one, so the idea was that they could come in there and ask questions instead of looking at a dashboard or a chart.
Got it. And this is an experience that there are many data tools in the ecosystem now that have some version of this. You happen to use Omni. Is that because you're an Omni customer at SYNQ?
Yeah, it was just we used that tool internally and had that available, but it could have been any given tool that has that functionality.
Sure. And just for fun, how did you find, once you provided all this context, and then you put on the other hat, you're the data consumer, how did you find the experience?
I think my takeaway is it's amazing when it works, but I would be so hesitant given my VP of marketing access to this, because it gets it wrong in 1 in 5 cases or something like that. And it's not immediately clear why it gets it wrong if you're not a data person. So I would feel very comfortable if I was like an analyst that wanted to speed up my exploratory data analysis workflow, and I kind of understand what goes on. I can dig in, open some boxes and everything. I definitely encourage them to use that. I would not replace my company-wide dashboard with this AI chatbot just yet.
Yeah, It's kind of consistent with the general advice that I feel like I would give to anyone in an enterprise context with AI right now, which is just you want your experts in the loop. AI makes
Yeah,
experts dramatically better, but it doesn't necessarily help people who don't have expertise in a given subject area because exactly like you said, they can't necessarily spot errors. And so the minute that that becomes true, then the whole value proposition kind of collapses.
yeah,
I think there are tools where you could imagine the BI layer being this kind of expert empowerment story as
yeah.
opposed to the like enabling the business user story, right? I think you could probably write light dash code in Cursor or other things like this.
Yeah, 100%. Also, you can actually see in Omni, which is really cool, you can see a log of all the different freeform text queries that anybody search for. And then you can see the feedback. So people can say, kind of, did they like or did they not like the output of that result in the LLM? So I think there'll be a task as this matures in, I don't know if it's going to be data analysts or analytics engineers, but in understanding how do you write this like AI context to say what should be returned, but also how do you understand and improve over time? Like what type of queries is this good at? And then go back, iterate on the AI context. And I feel like that's a whole, I would get into this early if I was experimenting with data tools. And I think it's only going to get better.
Hi, I'm Dan Poppy, the producer for the Analytics Engineering Podcast. If you want to hear more conversations like this, if you want to have your own conversations like this, join us at Coalesce 2025 in Las Vegas, October 13th through 16th for the premier Analytics Engineering Conference. Register now at getdbt.com. We'll see you there.
So the last thing you did was you used AI plus sync to monitor your production infrastructure. What does observability look like in the future? In the past, observability has looked like dashboards. It's like not that different than Datadog, really. Like,
Yeah.
it's Datadog for your data pipelines. And we've all become kind of used to what that looks like. Is it now just that we can create a bunch more monitors that are more effective and maybe run with more efficiency? Or is it somehow like fundamentally different?
I think it's fundamentally different. I think what we're quite excited about, and you should chat to Peter about this as well, my co-founder. But I think we're getting to a place where with observability tools, you can basically know what's wrong just at the right time, delivered with just the right information for you to understand exactly what went wrong, and delivered to just the right person. And that person can be in the data team or outside the data team. And I think these three things combined, if done really well, actually could mean that there's not much to look at from a tooling point of view. There might not be many dashboards or logs or anything like that, but it is a LLM summarized understanding of everything that went wrong into a brief root cause that's delivered to you based on a monitor that was created maybe without you even knowing about it. I think that's where this is heading. So less of a active tool you go into and look at a lot of logs and metrics and monitors, and more of a tool that actually tells you what goes wrong in a way you can understand it.
Is it still technical observability? Like this pipeline broke or this data is bad? Or does this also enable us to go down the route of business observability? Your business characteristics of your business are changing in ways that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, I think it maybe less so the last one. I just think
Yeah.
it's I don't really see that being data observability. I see more about it as these teams that kind of sit at the edge of the data warehouse. That could be a sales ops team managing Salesforce data, or like an engineering team creating web events. They are often the ones you actually want to notify about data issues. But if you have a change in a conversion rate for a specific country, I think you need a very different experience for some marketing person to understand that. So probably less the last one.
Got it. So this is fundamentally a part of a break, like a technical break fix flow. And you think that we're now able to do a significantly better job at making sure the right people have the right information. Does this also include remediating issues on some kind of automated basis, or no, the humans still have to do that?
I think it's probably a gradual step. I think you can easily imagine there's there's an issue being caught. Maybe there was no test going off catching it, but something else indicating that there's an issue, and you can have a new test being suggested. I think 80% of issues come from like root systems somewhere else, like someone typing in something in Salesforce, and I think that loop is still pretty hard to close, even with AI. So I'd imagine that would take longer. Um, what does work though, we in the fourth part of the article, we had a data issue, and I asked um, the SYNQ MCP through the cloud desktop to do a root cause analysis, and it just went through all the steps that I would have done as a data person. Like it looked at the model itself, it looked at if there's any errors, it mapped the lineage, it looked at all the upstream issues, it looked at recent code changes, and it kind of documented each single step until it got to the root cause. And that just works. Like there was I could follow it. It was very sensible. I think that's kind of happening now.
Yeah, that's incredible. Let's go back to a point that you made at the very beginning. You said something like, I see no reason why data practitioners shouldn't be using these tools today. What are the realistic things that you might hear? I don't know if you've had this conversation dozens of times or not, but I'm just curious, what are the reasons that you think are credible that people might give you as to why they haven't spent time here yet?
Yeah, people are busy. People's got their own things that they have to get around to. But the way I think about it is kind of if you look at a risk curve, I think the lowest risk is like the modeling and the testing workflow where you are in the driver's seat. It's just kind of boosting up your productivity. Much higher risk would be replacing your BI tool with an AI chatbot, and even higher risk might be customer facing something based on this. But I think that the first two, like using this as part of your data workflow, I think that there's not really a good excuse anymore not to do that. I don't think I can think of any.
I would have to imagine that one is related to like enterprise IT approvals or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like you need some model that is approved for use with your code, and I think also with your data in order to do parts of the work that you were describing. Even though Claude did not interact directly with Snowflake, you provided it snapshots of data that it could interact with, and that provided a lot of value to you.
Yeah.
I think most organizations have an approved model, at least one of them. You needed Cursor in your particular case. Did Cursor you can use for free for what, some period of time, right?
I think so, yeah.
DBT and the DBT Fusion engine free. There's a lot of like unblocked, like there's not necessarily any hard costs associated with at least like getting up and running and kicking the tires on this stuff in most organizations, I think.
Yeah, you're definitely right that we, in our MCP, one thing we do is we actually can query your raw data to detect if like a data issue only happened within one segment of your data. And that is something I get that part of it you might be hesitant letting loose as an enterprise. I think maybe also MCP. I'm not sure it's still landed at the right branding. Like it's such a confusing name. I don't even know how to really explain it, but it is really simple. I think it's very good at explaining what it does, so it's not a black box. So I think maybe it's a bit of if it lives natively, like setting up the DBT MCP is still a little bit hacky in an enterprise, right? But if it lived as part of cloud or something and it was just there to use, then I think it's very hard to make the case that you shouldn't at least try it.
Totally. And it's nice that you can set it up locally, because then you have no kind of permissions or procurement or any of these things. You can just kind of play with it. But I agree. I went through the process of setting up the MCP server locally, and I had a couple of points where I was had to debug something. We did just ship the MCP server as a remote MCP that's a part of the cloud platform. So that's available to anybody today who doesn't want to stand it up themselves. But there's a whole that you get into remote MCP, and all of a sudden there's like a whole thing around permissions and authentication, all this stuff. So
yeah,
either way is fine.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a if I had to identify as one data persona, it's probably the analyst, which I think is maybe at this point, many people that I know who were analysts, they wanted to be analytics engineers or data engineers, or they wanted to be machine learning people. And I think the analyst has had a bit of a hard time the last 10 years with more and more tools, workflows becoming harder and harder, and less time to tinker. And I really think MCPs or AI workflows in general is a bit of a turning point. We had this philosophy at Monzo in the beginning that you should be able to have an idea on the way into work and have it implemented by midday. And I think gradually, as we got 10,000 DBT models and CI checks took very long to run, that kind of disappeared. But I can so see a world where this is coming back, and I think MCPs can really help that. So that I'm super excited about.
I love that point. I had not thought about that before. The mindset of the analytics engineer or data engineer is I'm building an important, long-lasting piece of infrastructure. It takes the time that it takes. I have to get it right. The mindset of a data analyst is I had an idea. It may be totally useless. What I really care about is can I check and see if there's any value there as quickly as possible? And it's one of the reasons why Excel was always such like the data analyst's best friend, because you've got this toolbox in like Excel functions where you can kind of do whatever and you can do it real fast. And MCP all of a sudden, it's like very easy to plug a bunch of tools together and you get your answers like very fast as an outcome of that.
Yeah, we actually have one company we work with. They call Voi. They're like a scooter and bike company and so on out of Sweden, and they have a very strong data leader called Magnus, and he's very bought into metrics. So he's like, our data team doesn't produce dashboards; we only produce metrics. And I think that is in an AI world where this is MCPs and Claude and Cursor and all of that. I think that can be a very clever decision.
Totally agree. I think that is fascinating. I have this strong belief that there's no such thing as the wrong BI tool. Like there's different BI tools have different trade-offs that they make, and it's totally appropriate for different people to prefer different ones that match their use cases. I also wonder if the same might be true for models, or is there a right answer between Claude Desktop and Claude Code and Cursor? Like, I don't know, probably not. As long as you're using the same underlying context, very much including the metric definitions.
Yeah, I mean that's probably what I find here as well. When you do all these different workflows, what really matters is like, is there a lot of same definitions of the same metric? Is there documentation for the columns and the fields? Is data like high quality? Like all these things, they need to be in place before you can do a lot of these other cool workflows and have an AI chatbot with your data. So the foundations and the fundamentals, I think, are probably even more important, because if you look at a dashboard, you can kind of have this human sense of if it's wrong. But if it goes into a model, whatever way it's used, there might not really be a human in the loop.
Well, Mikkel, thank you so much for joining. This has been a fun conversation. I'm so glad that you set out to run this series of tests and that you shared everything that you learned. Now you're going to have to go back and recreate this every quarter or two as the tools continue to evolve.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. I liked writing these posts, and I think recommend anybody to tinker with these tools, and it's super easy to get started. So yeah, good being here, Tristan.
Amazing. Thanks for joining. The Analytics Engineering Podcast is sponsored by DBT Labs. I'm your host, Tristan Handy. Email us at podcast@dbtlabs.com with comments and guest suggestions. Our producers are Jeff Fox and Dan Poppy. If you enjoyed the show, drop us a review or share with a friend. Thanks for listening.